We're joined now by former Labour official Richard Power-Sayeed. Thanks for joining us, Richard. Now, I heard you earlier talking, so this is going to be a rare moment when you and I both agree on something. It is this. We'll talk about the politics of it, Lindsay Hoyle's position, what Keir Starmer and Sue Gray got up to in just a minute. But one thing I heard you talking about very eloquently, if I may say so, for me, arguably, and I think this is what people around the country will be thinking, what were they debating last night? They were debating the deaths of thousands of babies, of children, of women, a kind of slaughter going on in the Middle East, a horrible conflict. And what did we get? A bunch of squabbling children arguing about procedure, and you said that and you did that. They demeaned themselves. It was a vulgar, disgusting spectacle, really.
Yeah, totally agree. Although I also think that at the same time as there being all of this party politics, there is always a fair amount of policy and values in there as well. And you know what? Yesterday, I think I said when I was on Vanessa Feltz, I think that's what you're referring to. Yeah. I talked about how actually I thought the Tories and the SNP as well, their motions in the Opposition Day debate yesterday also reflected their values and their policies as Labour's amendment did. But I think, what we've seen since then is some really horrible politicking by the SNP and by the Tories, who are both, in kind of electorally weak situations right now. And I think they've just tried to make a huge fuss out of this, when what we really need to be focusing on, as you say, is, it's hundreds of hostages still trapped. They must be so terrified, the Israeli hostages, trapped somewhere in Gaza. 30,000 Palestinians killed. Palestinian children who have come into hospital with sniper bullet wounds in their heads from Israeli Defense Force snipers who appear to have been deliberately murdering children. That's the kind of conflict that's going on right now, and that's what our politicians should be focusing on.
You talk about horrible politicking. You talk about horrible politicking, Richard, and I put this to you. I think the cynical, disgusting, horrible politicking is for the Labour Party to go to the Speaker and say to him, give us our way and break with convention, or you'll have blood on your hands. That makes them, in my mind, as bullying and disgraceful as the extremist zealots that they're worried are going to come after their MPs.
I think that's a slightly unfair comparison, if I may say so, Alex. I would say that the concerns the MPs of all sides have got about their safety, they've been expressing that for a long time, and they've got really good reasons for doing so. There may be some situations where MPs say they're concerned about their safety, but actually what they mean is that they've had people loudly protesting outside their office, which is a different thing, I would say. And people have the right to protest loudly outside of MPs' offices. I think that's quite an important thing in our society. It's not nice, but it's the kind of thing that happens when there's a war going on.
I get that, but this mob has sent death threats to Mike Freer, who's having to stand down. They burnt down his constituency office. They've protested outside the private home of Tobias Ellwood. And I think this isn't just a, couple off situations here. We've seen the murder of Sir David Amess. We've got to get real about this. So I do actually think that there is a point here, but we shouldn't have that essentially being used by the leader of the opposition so his party doesn't split. He should have said to Labour, well, if you want to vote with the SNP, vote with the SNP. If you want to vote with the Tories, vote with the Tories, or whatever. He shouldn't be going around and saying to the Speaker, change convention or you've got blood on your hands. That's very cynical.
Well, look, firstly, just to make clear, I hope that it was apparent from what I said that I very much do believe in the threats to MP safety. And you're quite right that the murders of two MPs in recent years are of the most extreme example of that. But like the experiences you're describing there, Mike Freer, for instance, are no less troubling and much more recent, and absolutely, I think, were legitimate for the leader of the Labour Party to bring up, and legitimate for the Speaker to consider. You know what? The Speaker has admitted that he made a mistake, and I think that that's really actually quite impressive. You can't really imagine John Bercow admitting that he's made a mistake, right? The Speaker comes on.
No, I think you're right. And, but if it's true that Keir Starmer and Sue Gray is also cited, if they did put what I would suggest they were doing, they were putting emotional pressure on him. And the thing that keeps confusing me, you know, he did cite the danger to MPs. And let's not forget, as we keep saying, while this debate was raging last night, being projected onto the side of the House of Commons of Westminster Parliament was an illegal message from the river to the sea, while there was a pro-Palestine mob protesting outside as well. But, you know, if Hoyle had come to the Speaker's chair and said, listen, I believe MP's safety is at stake here and therefore I'm going to change the convention. Fine. He didn't say that. He came to this chair and he said, I think it's outmoded to have just one amendment, so I'm going to allow this other amendment. And what is a bad look is it just so happens, just fancy that other amendment was very helpful to Keir Starmer and Labour. That's not a good look.
It certainly isn't. I think that's reflected in what he's talked about over the last 12 hours or whatever it is. I would just point out, though, that this is all, you know, I think most people look at this and say it's kind of storm in a teacup type stuff, right? You know, this isn't like John Bercow over and over and over again going against the standing orders because he thinks, you know, and I think he had an argument that there was a direct conflict between the way that the government at the time was using the standing orders of the Commons versus parliamentary sovereignty, which he felt he had to defend. That's such a huge thing that the Speaker was involved with in terms of controversy and in terms of what was at stake. And frankly, yesterday, that was not the kind of thing that was at stake. It was an extremely symbolic and small vote on a hugely important issue, but not something that was ever going to have an impact on that issue. And the horrible thing that we've seen over the last 12 hours, whatever it is the way that people have just turned this into an interminable little SW1 debate about motions and amendments and people standing in people's offices or standing outside them or whatever, whilst Palestinians continue to die.
Yeah, exactly. Westminster bubble nonsense and a really unsavoury spectacle. As I say, I couldn't agree with you more on that, Richard. Listen, thanks so much for talking to us.
Thanks,
always
Richard.
a pleasure.